Today's episode, I'm going to be talking to River Jones. Hi, River. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Vic.
How are you? You all right?
I'm pretty good, thank you, yeah.
Excellent stuff. Good. Right, traditional first question. What do you do?
Oh, well, for my work, I'm a celebrant. So I conduct a lot of funerals and some weddings and some baby namings and other sort of family celebrations and ceremonies. And I also run training courses for celebrants and professional development courses for celebrants.
Right.
And apart from that, what I do is hang out with my family and friends, do a lot of playing and frolicking, and I'm completely obsessed with hula hooping.
Oh, okay. That's a first on many levels, I think, to be honest, for this. Okay, so it's an interesting thing that you sort of got involved in. So let's sort of go back, because often when people do things that are creative, there's a journey to arriving at that thing, I think, which is always interesting. I think always fascinates me. Mm-hmm. So how did you? Because there's an alternative way of thinking to this. I'm assuming with what you're doing. So what's your sort of early life like? Is it just where did you grow up, basically?
Where did I grow up? Oh well, I was born in Folkestone. I've got quite a complicated family life. We don't really need to go into that, but no. Yeah, I spent a year. My dad was in the army, and so I spent a year in Germany when I was about 5, and then I spent my primary school years on an army camp in Surrey, and going to a sort of village school nearby, and I spent my secondary school years around Guildford area, and then I came down here to Brighton, where I still live now. I'm one of the many people that came here as a student and stayed. So I came down to Sussex Uni to study the highly vocational option of philosophy and literature.
Right. That's interesting. Right. So there's a few things here to unpack, because there's a couple of people that I know that I've interviewed whose fathers were in the army, and obviously they moved around a lot, and I think that has a really significant effect on people, if it's in your formative years, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it does. And also that there's a lot of things about the sort of army upbringing that seem completely normal at the time, and then years later you kind of realize no, that wasn't completely normal to have kind of tanks lined up on the other side of my first primary school, and to kind of generally kind of grow up with the sound of firing ranges and
what about the sort of
romping along the road?
What about that sort of thing of discipline? Because there is a sort of because my father was in the army, and there's a sort of an attitude of mind that seems to be slightly different. I don't know whether that was just something of that time.
Well, with my dad, it's definitely that kind of discipline is still very much a part of his way of life. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's part of my character in the same way. It's something that I have to work quite hard at.
Do you think that's a rebellion against that?
No, I don't. I think it's just that that people have different natures in that regard. I mean, I say that, you know, as a mother and sort of thinking about my own children, you know, when you said what do I do as well, you know, I think, yeah, very important part of what I do is my sons are all grown up, you know, but, you know, still being a mum, and newly a nana as well. But yeah, I often sort of look at my boys and look at their kind of different relationships to work and this, you know, discipline as a quality. And my middle son is exceptional, and I feel like that he's more sort of similar to my dad in that way, that he kind of relies on discipline to you know, for him, it's just he's so kind of rational that it doesn't make sense for him to be any other way. So for example, when he was at university, you know, I was the typical, I mean, I was the worst, you know, the students that leave things to the last minute and kind of, you know, I was dreadful. And my son, my middle son, who was the first to go to uni, complete opposite, he quickly kind of worked out that it was really stressful to have work hanging over him, and he wanted to do a lot of other things. You know, he's a musician like yourself, and he's also sort of sportsman, to play a lot of football, wanted to kind of, you know, do all the student things, and he worked out the best way of making all that possible and enjoying his life to the max would be to always stay really ahead of things, get everything done and out of the way, and then, you know, so he would always sort of finish everything ages before it has to be handed in. I'm not, this is something that I've only kind of, I'd say it's really come to fruition for me, you know, with my celebrancy work. You know, that's probably been the thing that I've been most disciplined about in my life. When I say that, I did yoga for many years, so I was pretty disciplined about that. And I'm sort of, yeah, bizarrely sort of disciplined with my hula hooping. It's a kind of funny thing, you know, because I kind of
see, this is what
playing.
This is what I'm getting at, because you see, I'm interested in that side of things about creative people, because often when you think about creative people, then, you know, the general sort of opinion is they're not organised. You know, it's chaos, or it's organised chaos, right?
Yeah.
But that's not always the case, of course. And also, there are certain things that are a form of organisation that don't appear to be.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? This is what I'm getting at, and it's sort of quite subtle. So what I was sort of thinking about with that, thinking about early on, having that, because it's not, it's sort of implied, isn't it? If people are in the army, it's there everywhere. You know, they have to be somewhere. Yeah, they have to do certain things. Yeah, I suppose you see that with people going to work, but, you know, but within the army, because of the regiment and everything, it's a different sort of.
It's also like, in terms of sort of systems and organisation, you know, how things work in the army is that you have to be doing things within a system that, you know, if you're taken out, that somebody else can kind of come in and see exactly what's going on. So everything has to be done in a form of organisation that is obvious to anybody who comes along. And my forms of organisation are not like that at all. I'm doing, before becoming going sort of full time into celebrancy, I worked for many years at the University of Sussex, and I used to manage and organise and sort of develop, you know, big projects. And, you know, I had projects going with lots of different courses going on in community settings and on campus, and big European funded projects. And I had a colleague that kind of came in and, you know, worked closely beside me, you know, as my sort of project worker, and I was the project manager. And I remember her saying to me, after we'd been working together for a sort of year or two, she said, you're the most chaotically organised person I've ever come across. She's just like, it looks like total chaos, but you know, you've actually got a handle on everything.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, that is a really fascinating little thread that I see that with people, and I just wanted to, because it's not really something that's come up in conversation before on the podcast, and I think it's actually a really important point. So when you said you went and studied philosophy and literature,
that
sounds an interesting course. So the interesting thing about Brighton is, as you say, there are a lot of people who never left.
Yeah.
You obviously enjoyed it, Brighton.
I did, and it's only really in the last sort of, I don't know, 5-10 years that I've really taken stock of like how much value that I got from doing that course, and what, how brilliant it was to study a course that is essentially about thinking skills.
Yes.
And it's something that I sort of took for granted, and it just gradually dawned on me in more recent times that actually that was really, really useful. I really learned to not just to think, but to question things, and to kind of analyze the sort of structure of my own thinking, if you like.
Yes.
So I've never been in my adult life a lazy thinker.
No.
And I think, those kind of thinking skills are really under-supported and underdeveloped in
yes.
Yes. It's widely talked about today, isn't it? Especially, with the kind of whole online culture and all of that. But so that was really, really useful. And I always joke about it being a highly kind of vocational option, but actually it really does relate quite closely now to, it's probably the most useful subject I could have studied for what now turns out to be my vocation, which is celebrancy.
No, I think that's a really good, because again, as that's one of those things about questioning what you think, not necessarily what other people think, but what you think, because I think that's there are a lot of points of view with people. Okay, all I see now is a lot of people just adopting somebody else's idea, but actually asking yourself a question about, how do I arrive at this? As you say, you don't see that very often. Well, I don't. Particularly like when I'm sort of teaching people sort of creative skills, they're writing songs or whatever. And I use a lot of lateral thinking techniques in order for people to come up with ideas and stuff.
Sorry, Vic. I've been listening to a few of your podcasts in preparation for this conversation, and you've spoken a bit about your work, sort of facilitating creativity with musicians. And I used to work in quite a similar ways in my, going back before my university career in kind of community engagement, project management. I was a facilitator and a teacher of creative writing.
So, okay. So let's have a look at this then. So there's a lot of things that you sort of tagged here. Yeah. So when you finished your course, what university course? What did you do?
I actually went did a PGCE, but that was more really because I wasn't really quite sure what to do next. I knew I wanted to do something working with people, and with and education was really important. I didn't really feel the vocation to be a school teacher, but I did feel a big attraction to education as a field. And then I actually became a mum. By the end of the course, I was expecting my eldest son, who's now a dad himself, and so I was a young single mum in Brighton, and I kind of got into running creative writing workshops in the community. I mean, I just started doing one in a local community centre where there was a creche, and then it sort of grew from there, and I ended up kind of doing working with a lot of different sorts of people in different situations, everything from homeless and ex-homeless writers to I did a really interesting project with women who were at what used to be a Magdalen laundry and now is the Emmaus project out in Portslade.
Right.
That do you know that place?
No, I don't, but that fascinates me. Yeah.
So with I was with people with mental health issues, and so I ended up kind of doing that, and also just general, people that were interested in writing as a kind of creative.
So why did you pick on writing?
Why was it writing? Oh, that was always my passion from an early age, like from really young. As soon as I could write, I was really into writing stories and poems, and it was a big thing. And most of the time when I was growing up, I always thought I was going to be a writer.
Right. Okay.
And so it was still a big passion.
Yeah.
And it's quite odd now. I don't actually write that much these days, apart from ceremonies. It mostly all goes into that.
That's fascinating, because again, I know that from the point of view of drawing and painting. As a kid, I was doing that virtually all the time. And I don't do any of that now, which is strange, isn't it? Because it was like if it's an early thing that really is the thing that you do, and then suddenly not to do that anymore. It's interesting. So the creative writing thing, that's really interesting, because again, you've got this sort of community based thing going on. You're engaging with elements of community, aren't you? Which is sort of quite diverse, and in a strange way, you could say slightly chaotic. Because it's not like, well, I'm just doing this stuff for business people or whatever. It's like, it's wherever you see those people that really need that.
So I guess if I look at the things that I've done in my working life, from the creative writing stuff, there was a brief stint that I did as a sort of secondary school teacher, very brief, like 2 terms.
Not surprised.
But I think community has been a big part of it. Working with all sorts of different people from all kinds of different backgrounds, that's always been a thing. Working with people, and some kind of feeling of work as service to community. And I've always followed my heart in my work and wanted to, my overarching kind of ambition that I started out with in life was just to be able to kind of earn a living from doing things that felt real and meaningful,
Yes.
And I've been, very fortunate to be able to do that. And working with community and working with people of all sorts of different backgrounds has been
so you've got you're doing the creative writing now. Is the next stage actually working for the university?
And that kind of it just all came together really, because I got involved with Queen's Park Books, which is a kind of community publishing, community publishers in Brighton. I got involved with that through the creative writing side of things, and then through that I got involved with a couple of projects that the university was a partner in, the Centre for Continuing Education as it then was, and then I started running some courses for them, and then after a year year or two of, you know, being involved with a few courses and projects, I eventually kind of got a desk and an office and some big projects to run, and, you know, was there for the next 14, 15 years.
Oh, right. Oh, great. Yeah. So within that, what were you doing at the university? What type of things were you doing?
What types? So the Centre for Continuing Education was effectively the kind of you know, one of the sort of widening participation parts of the university. So it was all about, you know, open access courses, you know, for the wider community. And then my stuff was on the margins of that, so looking at people that wouldn't even normally dream of going to university. So I had in the wonderful days of European funded projects, I had I ran a lot of projects that were about supporting women returners, mostly people that had time out from the workplace, you know, whatever, for bringing up families and were wanting to work, you know, return to work. That was the kind of, you know, the reason that it had the funding. But it was about, yeah, creating alternative sort of pathways, you know, into back into higher education or further education. It was always quite holistic sort of programs. So there was a lot of, you know, confidence building and assertiveness and, you know, personal development stuff alongside sort of study skills development, and a lot of, yeah, kind of a lot of those kind of things. And then, you know, I also taught creative writing, also worked on a lot of oral history projects, different community oral history projects. Actually, the first project that I did and the last project that I did in my time at Sussex were both working with homeless and ex-homeless people as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Again, you know, there's sort of elements there about things that, particularly like, you know, with homeless people and oral history of just ordinary people. There's some really important things that would just disappear. You know, things about life experience of people, which we need to understand. We need to know about. It's not a case of understanding it. You know, I'm particularly, because I have a fascination for sort of historical things, but particularly things that are, you know, not the big, you know, the great man did the great thing type of thing. I'm not that bothered about that, because all of that's a load of nonsense. A lot of it is, you know, it's, you know, things have been written to spin a story. But it's when you get stories of people's lives, you know, and how they interacted and how creative people were to get over extraordinary hardships at periods in their lives. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, I'm still now dealing with the stories of people's lives, you know, as a celebrant, and I definitely see a kind of continuity there between that kind of, you know, oral history work, and then, you know, obviously gathering people's life histories as a celebrant and sort of telling people's life stories, and you know, at their funerals, or often, you know, telling the stories of families and relationships, you know, in other happier ceremonies as well. Yeah.
So after the university thing, is the next step doing the Celebrant work?
Yeah, well, they kind of happened alongside each other in a way, because in sort of around that, there were 99, 2000. I think 1999 was when I got my, you know, desk job at the university. You know, when I kind of went from doing odd bits out and about to actually like having a job there. But it was also the year that I first got asked to do a ceremony. I was involved with a women's group that that we used to get together and do a ceremony at full moons, and we did some ceremonies, open ceremonies for the cross-quarter festivals as well, you know, those sort of halfway points between the equinox and solstices. And we did a ceremony at a Beltane celebration on the side of Ditchling Beacon, you know, looking out over the Sussex Weald.
Yeah.
And it was a young couple that had turned up to this ceremony, and afterwards they asked me would I do a hand fasting ceremony for them. Never even heard of a hand fasting ceremony, never had ever crossed my mind. You know, I'd never heard of celebrancy. I don't think anybody really, it wasn't a thing in those days. So, and but yeah, I was kind of quite bowled over to be asked, and I did it and sort of found my way through it and really loved it and knew that it was something that I really felt attracted to. And so all through the time that I was working at Sussex, I would occasionally be asked to do ceremonies for people, and I would, you know, it was like a thing that I did on the side, and every now and then I'd be kind of thinking, oh, dare I kind of plunge into this? And you know, it was that thing of leaving a kind of secure job, you know, while I was bringing up a family as well. And yeah, I never quite sort of took that leap of faith, and then eventually they closed the whole department down, and I got redundancy, and I kind of got, you know, a big,
so that's
to make the leap, and you know, I've never looked back. Yeah. And the other thing that happened that's sort of significant and runs alongside this as well is that in 2000 I first came into contact with the order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and started studying Druidry as well. I'd already been sort of, you know, delving into earth-based, nature-inspired, just being naturally drawn to a nature-inspired spiritual path, really, by that point. And yeah, Druidry seemed a good way to just expand on that and tap into a kind of community of like-minded people. So although I have never, you know, there are many celebrants who sort of set themselves up as, you know, specifically Druid, offering Druid and pagan type of ceremonies, you know, to those communities. But my passion has always been outreach. I suppose it's been, you know, what I was doing at the university as well. I've always wanted to kind of take something that I feel is important for everyone to be able to access, you know. So you know, starting out with, you know, creative self-expression with the creative writing, coming through to you know, access to education, and it was all about not just guiding people to education, but guiding people to, you know, enabling people to kind of take more choice and have more control over their lives. You know, that was really what underpinned a lot of the work that I did at the university. And as a celebrant, it's been, but these ceremonies, these moments in people's lives are so important, and it's so important that they're held in ways that feel real and natural and meaningful to people. So yeah, there's a.
Would you say that sort of the idea that, you know, that you're more inclusive comes from that philosophical training that you did?
I don't know if it comes from that so much as I think it's curious, isn't it? I wonder where it does come from. I think it might be more partly to do with kind of having quite a sort of odd mixed background, you know, kind of growing up in, I don't know, I think if I look at my whole family history, you know, it's all a bit sort of liminal, you know, on the kind of, you know, not quite working class, not quite middle class, growing up, you know, army camps, being very quite in, you know, with army life, you become hyper aware of social class.
Yes.
Because we all lived on the army camp, and we went to school at the village school, and then there were the officers' quarters that were on the edge of the village rather than on, you know, down the road next to the squaddies camp, you know. And yeah, so there was something about that, and then yeah, obviously coming from, you know, I was the first person in my family to go to university as well, and yeah, and even if I go back to kind of my grandparents' generation, you know, they're from sort of working class, but kind of then, you know, made good, if you like. My dad is one of the very few people that kind of went into the British Army as a recruit and worked himself all the way up through the ranks, you know, and now carries the title of lieutenant colonel. You know, it's so there's a kind of something about kind of moving between different parts of
that is really, really interesting. Because that makes a lot of sense. I had a very interesting experience with my own father, which I'll tell you, which sort of epitomizes what you're talking about, actually. Now, my father got to be a sergeant major in the Royal Horse Artillery, and he was as hard as nails, my dad. You know, he was a boxer and, you know, great sportsman and everything, but he was one of those sort of characters. And one day we were living in Cornwall. He'd retired from the army, you know, sort of disabled out of it, actually. But he'd been a professional soldier all his life, really. And we had a visit from the son of one of his officers. So it wasn't the officer that he knew, but it was the son of this chap. And he'd come to pay a visit. And I think he was probably in the army, this lad. Well, lad, you know, young man. And suddenly we saw another person in my father. He was completely different. And it was like almost standing to attention.
Right.
It was incredible. And like my mother and my sister were like completely, and myself were completely stunned. But it's that sort of thing of how, like you say, you become hyper aware of all those sort of interesting things that I don't know whether in ordinary life you're so aware of it.
Yeah.
But that officer thing, that what you're talking about, you know, the officers and
and I suppose I lived, and in my secondary school years now I was living on council estates in Guildford as well, so, you know, so I was growing up in that kind of environment and really seeing that side of life, and then going from there to university and realizing that there's lots of people that are coming from a very privileged kind of background that have no clue about that at all. So there's always been
that was fascinating for me because I was quite young seeing that, realizing that these people who were officers was something that I had never experienced before. This sort of thing where you suddenly got, you know, if you like, in inverted commas, upper class. No, they're not. But you know what? You understand what I mean? Well, you know, that was quite something. So I think that's an important part of this. When you know, your experience of mixing with all sorts of people. I think that's really, really fascinating. So with the celebrancy work then, obviously you brought a lot to that from your experience of what you've been doing and the type of people that you've done, you know, courses and work with. When did you really feel, maybe this was straight away, I don't know, but when did you sort of feel like this is the thing that I
think from the very first ceremony, to be honest, like it's like this is How
did that feel? Literally, how did that feel?
Well, I can remember that very clearly, because we'd done this sort of preparation, and that the actual process of preparing and designing the first ceremony just felt really interesting, and it felt like a real privilege, to find out about those people. The whole thing felt, it felt very precious, in like, what, wow, this is amazing that these people are kind of trusting me to kind of hold this really special moment for them. And designing a ceremony together is quite a creative sort of process. And I can't remember that much about the sort of detail of the ceremony, but I do remember, we had a kind of plan in place. By the day I'd met them a few times, and you're kind of making, at that point, you're making up not just the ceremony, but you're kind of making up the process of how you're working towards the ceremony in a way. And then on the morning, when I was sort of getting ready for the ceremony, and got some special clothes to wear, and I sat down, I had my little kind of space where I sit and meditate each day, and I realized I was feeling really kind of quite anxious and nervous about this, conducting my first ceremony. And then I just thought, had this light bulb moment of thinking, crikey, this is the last thing that I need to bring here. That they might be anxious, whoever's making the cake's probably going to be anxious, there's going to be there's going to be all sorts of kind of flapping, and my role here has to be a completely still point, to be totally rooted and anchored, and be to kind of hold this space and hold it really steadily. And there was something about the kind of realization that was what was needed, that just enabled me, magically, to kind of just step into that space, and I think it's probably quite fundamental, definitely quite fundamental to that, is a sense that of doing this in in a spiritual context. So I'm not seeing it as a job that I'm just doing on my own. I'm seeing it as something really special. I'm calling in all the support and all the benevolent powers, forces and influences from whencever they may come, and channeling that into the holding of that moment.
I like that. I think, because that, for me, is how creativity works. It's that thing that you're there, you're like a channel for something, the conduit, you're part of the alchemy. It's not you, it's something that works through you, and however you want to view that. And I see that actually the most, from a creative, just coming from literally an artistic creative perspective for the moment, is the most effective way of being in that place, because you can get your ego out of the way, just as you say, like being like on that sort of still point. And it's actually very difficult to do, unless, of course, you feel that it's not you anymore. Like you're saying, you're calling in something. And I think that is a really interesting point. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are creative all know, but some don't know it. And it's never people are never alerted to the fact that that's how things are.
When I used to teach and facilitate creative writing, one of the things I used to say to people was, we all dream. This creativity is a totally natural ability of the human mind. We are in our sleep, utterly without effort, and our minds or brains or imaginations are creating these extraordinary, often wildly outlandish scenarios and stories. so yeah, I'm kind of with you that it's a sort of natural thing, and also, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, this question of things that you create as opposed to, or in combination with, things that flow through you. Because in my own kind of creative life, if you like, I have written still for most of my life. I still write the odd poem now and then. But in more recent years, I've also birthed quite a few songs, and I didn't say written, I said birthed, because in my experience that I've had with songs and music has been totally, as you've described it, as just receiving something, and I don't even I feel like proud and glad to kind of be associated with them and to have been a part of their pathway into the world, but I don't feel like they've come from me. I feel like they've come from this other place, and that I've just helped to bring them through. Whereas if I look at my poems, the inspiration for them may have come from something, but it's a completely different kind of creative process that has much more to do with intentionality and the drive and the need to express something, and the falling back on, and the utilizing a whole lot of kind of learned skills and crafts and honing of something. They're on completely different ends of a kind of creative scale for me.
There is a thing about this. In fact, I was interviewing somebody yesterday, and this came up in conversation when we were talking about songwriting. When I sort of teach songwriting, I often say, well, look, songwriting, there's a craft here.
Yeah.
And if you think about somebody who's a great carpenter, he can craft, a chair, and then another chair, and then another one. But every now and again, he gets one chair that is much better than the others. And there's something that's special about that one. And there is an element of that, even if you're using a skill that you have, where something else happens. And I think sometimes we forget. I don't know whether we forget that. I think when it's taught, often that's never said. But it's having that sort of mystery about things, like you're saying about dreams. It's mysterious that we're dreaming, and as you say, most fantastical ideas.
I've had songs just arrive, and they really have, like, there's been no sense that I was thinking about the thing that the song was about, it just literally arrived, and it's such a kind of perfect thing. To me, it just feels completely magical. And I have actually woken up with a tune and words, in my mind, on waking. I'll say that's so different from the kind of creativity as sort of self-expression. It's very fascinating, isn't it, how it works?
It's totally. I mean, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 45 years. Knowingly. Obviously, as a kid, you were doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinated me.
And people have so many different routes towards it, don't they, too? It's really fascinating to sort of watch my kids with their creativity as well, particularly my two younger sons. The middle one's a musician and the younger one is an artist, and they're both like, just do it, they can't not do it. yeah, I think
that's the thing, you know, that you can't frame it with that sort of logical, sort of left-brained, analytical thing. You can see patterns.
Yeah.
Like you say, you've learned techniques that you can do. But really, you know, it doesn't really fall into a way that you can actually understand it. It's just one of those things that you just have to embrace as sort of mysterious. And, you know, so obviously when you're doing something, when you're sort of telling the story of somebody's life, or you're telling something about, you know, if you're doing something where maybe like the hand fasting thing, so you're engaging the story of the people. I mean, that's got to be just you can have some ideas, can't you? But I mean, it just comes. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different thing again, I suppose, with creating ceremonies, because then it's much more about being a spokesperson for the family, the community, the moment, you know, whatever it is. So it's, there is definitely creativity that kind of comes into things, but it's it's not the kind of core of it somehow, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's something that you bring to it rather than being core and the essence of what the thing is.
Yeah, there must be also a level of sensitivity to what you do, because you have to, I'm assuming, hit the right tone, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I talk to both clients and students about that. So when you say about hitting the right tone, I send people drafts, you know, of the ceremony, and I always say, you know, don't worry about proofreading it, because I'm not necessarily going to read this word for word anyway, but what I'd like you to fact check it and also feel check it, you know.
Yes, yeah. That's a really good term. I like that.
Feels right. And I talk to my students as well. I tell them about you know, when you're retelling stories that have been told to you, you know, it's something about kind of capturing the voices, you know, and noting down some kind of key phrases and really kind of retelling that story with the feel that it was told to you with as well. Yeah.
There is that thing of, I'm going to use the word animate. You know, there's definitely that thing that is, we have to sort of animate a story in such a way that, as you said, put the feeling into the story. And that's absolutely true with music, you know, and that's one of the things that I find is actually, again, it's a tricky one for people to be able to pass that information over to somebody, where you say, well, what, you know, what's the song about? And when I mean that, it's not what the facts are. It's like, what's the feeling? What's the spirit of this? You know, what animates it? Because once you've got that, the song writes itself, which goes back to your thing about, you know, a song will literally appear. It's almost like it's almost like a courtship, I think.
Well, like, I guess the songs that I've been, you know, the kind of songwriting that I do is very, very different to the kind of songwriting that my son does, you know, and I think he's a genius songwriter. I think he's just got that kind of it's really interesting as well. Sorry, I'm getting distracted, but isn't it so interesting that the tunes that people create, or the tunes that come through, like, have a kind of mark of the person on them or something, so that you can sometimes, like, hear a song and you kind of just know it's a song that it's written by somebody. But whereas his come from playing, he's a guitarist, so that's always the root of it, is that just literally kind of playing around with notes and chords. That's always the kind of root of something. For me, the root of all of the songs is it's all been in it. I feel like they're songs of the land and songs of nature and songs of yeah. I mean, I remember hearing for the first time about that concept of song lines,
Yes.
in there, and it just ignited my whole brain. I thought, oh, this just makes total sense to me, and I actually felt like I've got to go to Australia because it just.
Well, this is fascinating because I'm looking at that idea from walking pilgrimage routes here.
Yeah.
Because I think that is something that we understand that from, as you say, from Australia, Aboriginal Australians.
Yeah.
But we must have done that because, of course, we did. We must have done that because it just makes sense that the song, a land sings itself into being. The birds sing things into being. You know what I mean? And all those myths of deities singing the world into being. I mean, it's just there. It's in our sort of stories of the past. And I was thinking, well, if you walked whole pilgrimage routes, they must have there something that ties you into that. Okay, we've mapped them physically, whereas obviously the song lines map them in sound or stories. But before people wrote things down, we must have done the same thing. So I'm actually got a little project underway to do that, to write some songs while walking pilgrimage routes. So which is part of something I'm doing at the moment. And I just did a little solo podcast about it.
Oh, I'll definitely have a listen to that bit.
Yeah, it's not up yet. It's just about to go up. So but it's just that idea of, I'm trialing out a few things at the moment, seeing how far I can walk, and just generally, some of the sort of physical things. But
the old A27, A270, Brighton to Lewis Road, seems to have been a particularly fertile songline to me. Like most of my songs seem to have kind of just sprung into being as I've been cycling up and down or driving up and down that road.
Yeah. Well, I always think about the old, the R&B song Route 66, and the fact that Billy Bragg, I can't remember what it was, the A14 or something like that. Did. But it's that sort of idea that routes that people take that go into different places are important because they're always travelled with some form of intention, aren't they? You're going somewhere to do something, even if it's only going to work. Yeah, it's great. So you're obviously busy with this, I can see. I'm sure that people are still getting hitched up and people are still passing away.
Yes, flurry of inquiries just yesterday, actually. Yeah, so it's a funny old business. It's a bit like buses. All celebrants will say that. You kind of get a little lull, and then suddenly they all turn up at once. Yeah. And then the running of the courses is a bit more sort of steady.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's good. Well, River, that was wonderful. I put some stuff on the show notes about how people can contact you.
Oh, thank you.
And I think you're pretty unique on this one. I haven't got anybody who's done anything like this, so that's been a really interesting chat. And I particularly like, I often find there's some sort of thing that's relevant to me when I talk to people, and about your own sort of my own upbringing and stuff, and you sort of think, that's interesting. Listening to somebody's story.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting chat, and actually, it's been one of those really nice conversations, Vic, where I've discovered things about my own path that I hadn't really.
Yeah. Well, you know, sometimes this happens, I think, when you just chat. And that's why, you know, I don't script. I don't script anything, because it's actually nice to see where a conversation goes anyway. And it's always nice to hear people's stories. I'm, you know, generally fascinated by people, and you know, and what they do with their life. So yeah, it's brilliant. So all the very best.
Thank you, Vic.
And hopefully at some point we'll cross paths.
I'm sure we will.
Yep, yeah. I'm sure we will. So thanks ever so much, River. That's great.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. So big thanks to River. There's a lot of information on the show notes as usual. So check them out, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.